Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I am Braden. This guy over here is Tim, and this is The Second Legacy, and thank you so much for stopping by. So one of the things that Tim and I did when we founded Second Legacy, we wanted to dive deeper into conversations and deeper into the facts and give you the information that you need to maybe bring that person in your life who's maybe a little bit of an anti-gun or maybe on the fence over to our side and provide that legacy to the next generation, hence the Second Legacy. Now, if you would like to see the Second Legacy go, if you like the content that we're hitting, please consider hitting that subscribe button, liking the video, and making sure you share this because we would love to have you help us grow this channel, and we are excited about it. And today is no different because we have some amazing content. We have some special guests, the armed attorneys. Now, I'm going to say this is not legal advice, so everything that we're about to talk about is merely a conversation amongst creators. Like I said, the armed attorneys, Richard and Emily, how are you guys doing? And welcome to the show.
Oh, it's great to be back. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Show's doing great.
Oh, that's awesome. It's so cool to have you guys back on because you were on our inaugural episode around something different, but this is a little bit different of a conversation. And before I introduce this, Tim, how you doing? Life all right?
Yeah, doing great, man. And really looking forward to this conversation. It's awesome to have the armed attorneys back with us. And this ought to be pretty interesting because this is actually, well, let's just say it's an interesting subject. Now I'll segue back to you to allow you to kind of talk about what it is we want to touch upon. And because like you said, there are just so many bits and pieces to this that this is really an interesting conversation, I believe.
Oh, absolutely. And let the dancing between the minefields commence. So what we're talking about, and this is why we invited the armed attorneys on, they had a video, and it was all about the Michigan State University tragedy that occurred. Now, there was a very interesting perspective and kind of two things that came out of this. On one side, part of the population was saying, well, it was a felony account. That felony account should have put the person in prison. But then the other side says, well, wait a minute, was that a felony, and is that counterintuitive to our gun rights movement? And that's what we're going to talk about going forward. So with that introduction, Richard or Emily, do you guys want to kind of set up your video, your perspective, and then we'll kind of bounce back?
Sure. So what we have is, of course, we've got this horrible shooting at Michigan State University. And as more facts come out about the perpetrator, we've got a past arrest in 2019 for a felony offense. It was a felony gun crime. It was actually pled down to a misdemeanor, and he was placed on probation for that misdemeanor, which he successfully completed. But we had people kind of up in arms, both pro-gun and anti-gun people, saying he was arrested for a felony. Why wasn't he a convicted felon? We've got soft on crime prosecutors. They're dropping the ball. And so then our dive into it was, well, wait a second. What did he get arrested for? And, what happened and what would that actually have done for someone who is obviously unstable enough to walk into a room full of people he doesn't know and start shooting?
Yeah, because I'd say the two competing interests that we have here are, and we've seen it, Summer of Love starting in 2020, these, kind of progressive district attorneys going soft on crime, the defund the police movement. And we've seen the Second Amendment community find themselves in this position where it's not wanted, but having to fill this void of, hey, maybe people aren't protecting our lives, but then we see the crime that he's charged with, and what we're looking at is what was a felony there would be legal in, all of our constitutional or permitless carry states.
Yep. Right. It was just carrying concealed.
Yeah. And should we as a Second Amendment community, condemn him for something that is legal in half the country?
Right. And that's what I think is so fascinating about this conversation. That's why I'm really excited about where this goes, because you are 100% correct. If you look at this in a different lens, like say through the lens of Texas, there was not even an arrest possibility. There was no felony. There was no charge. There was no nothing because constitutional carry would apply there perfectly fine. However, when you go into Michigan, because different rules exist, there's a felony application. Now, on a much broader, big base scale, you kind of go, well, there's a little bit of a discrepancy there. Maybe we should address this in summation, but that's a different conversation for a different time. So the big part here, and Tim, this is where I'll toss over to you. The argument is essentially, should the conversation be around, well, he had a felony, so he should have been in prison, but the original felony cause was something that's constitutionally protected. What do you think? Just kind of pass the minefield back over to you. What do you think?
Yeah, so this is interesting because the duplicity of the discussion is that I think everybody on this particular conversation agrees that constitutional carry makes sense, right? So prior to his actions at the college campus, he had no history of a criminal record. So in the state of Indiana, where I reside, he would be allowed to carry a firearm without a permit because we're a constitutional carry state now. So the original charge, in my mind, is an invalid charge. Now, that's not to excuse the actions that he, carried out later, but
of course,
I don't agree with the notion that, he should have been jammed up with a felony for carrying a firearm without a permit. Because again, I believe in constitutional carry. Now, it would have been different if he had a criminal history and then had a firearm, but that wasn't the case. So that's one side of it. But I can also see the other side of the argument where people say, well, had that felony charge stuck, then we would have stopped him from having a gun potentially to go into this campus. But would we have? And I think that's the other side of the argument. I think if you take a look at it from our perspective of advocating for constitutional carry and looking at holistically at what took place, the argument could also be made that their gun laws don't work, right?
Yep.
So
100%.
It doesn't matter if he was charged with a felony or not. Would that truly have stopped his future actions? And I don't think that they would have, because he's deranged, right? Anybody that would do something like that simply isn't right in the head. So I don't agree with charging people with pre-crimes. I don't believe, assuming the worst about people. And sure, you're going to have bad actors, but we can't stop that. That's just human nature. They're going to be bad actors. I think we all would agree that if we could just snap our fingers and make violent crime go away tomorrow, we would all be in favor of that. But that's not the reality. We don't live in utopia. And the fact is, we're always going to have people that are going to commit these types of crimes. And so I kind of viewed this whole conversation as gun control doesn't work. It didn't work in this instance. And I still advocate and believe in constitutional carry.
Yep. And this is where I'll throw it back over to Richard and Emily, because this is where that conversation gets really nuanced, right? So from my perspective, and I even covered this on my channel, when you're looking at the scenario we're talking about, yeah, we all support constitutional carry. This person should not have even had a felony or arrest based on the fact that they had the Second Amendment right in their car or on their person. However, it goes against the points of gun control, the fact that they did exist, even though they may have been unconstitutionally existing. The fact is the gun control laws still existed and they still did not work. So Richard and Emily, do you guys think that, I guess it's kind of splitting hairs, but do you see a benefit in more one side of that argument or the other? I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, I would say, and I bet Emily agrees with me because we've talked about this before, but the person willing to go on a mass killing spree is willing to break a gun law about how they acquire a firearm. I'm just going to go out on a limb here.
I'm just saying it.
So
he's just saying.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say that, but I don't think that would have necessarily stopped. It doesn't stop maniacs.
Right.
And, bear in mind, you are talking to two criminal defense attorneys. And so our views about what should be against the law are perhaps more extreme than your average Joe. For example, there's one attorney in our office who firmly believes that unless there is a victim, there should be no such thing as a crime against society. So any drug possession should be 100% legal. If you drive while intoxicated, but you don't hurt anybody, that should be 100% legal. So you're talking to people with skewed, I won't say I'll go that far on the record, but you're talking to people with probably skewed perspectives on the matter. And yet, Richard's point holds, which is if you are willing to break the highest law against man that we have, which is murder, you are certainly willing to break whatever victimless crime we have for obtaining a firearm when you aren't supposed to.
Well, right. And I think that's where this gets so interesting, because you can get bogged down on he should have been a felon. He should have been in prison. He wasn't a felon. It was constitutional, but it was still against the law in Michigan. But I think the overarching point here is, even though that statute in Michigan was unconstitutional, especially from a constitutional carry perspective, in 25 of the other states in the United States, there would be no infraction. But because the gun control was in place, and currently right now, they're actually pushing even more gun control in the state of Michigan in light of these terrible incidents. It's a very interesting perspective, because you can look at it and go, it still did nothing, even though they were already unconstitutional on a state level. They still did nothing. And that kind of reinforces that exact same point that we've seen in state after state and campus after campus, all these gun control zones. It doesn't work. It's not the answer. The problem is people, not the laws. And I guess that's the biggest takeaway.
Gun-free zone.
Yeah, he walked into a gun-free zone. And it's, I mean, we enter this brackish water of, and I think that a lot of probably this audience finds themselves in this situation of being on the side of law and order. I mean, they don't want chaos in the streets. They don't want people burning down their businesses. But then they have to realize that same order is maybe the order that's going to enforce gun confiscation or unconstitutional gun laws. And so it's a bizarre scenario.
That's what. No such thing as a victimless crime. There we go. We're back at square one with our defense attorney perspective.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to chime in on that one, but you guys touched on a very important point. It was a gun-free zone. So here we have another example of, these anti-gun laws being, ineffective. And so their solution to the tragedy is to pass more laws that criminals willfully ignore. So at what point do we stop this insanity and stop blaming inanimate objects, quit trying to ban everything under the sun and doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result every time? And when do we finally have a conversation as a country and address the true issues at the root cause of the violence in our culture? Because there are other cultures out there that are very much gun cultures, just as we are, but they don't suffer from the same crime. So it's not the gun. Go to Switzerland, go to the Czech Republic. Even Canada, with their restrictive gun laws, is still very much a gun culture, has a very high ownership of firearms in their population, but they don't suffer from the same societal decay that we suffer from mostly in our major cities. So that's what I think that we should talk about going forward is push past all this nonsense and the notion that we can just legislate our way out of this problem and start to look at the actual root causes.
And Tim, I'd add to that because I think that's an excellent point. And I would add, when we sort of draw outwards like you're doing and look at other cultures and look at other, other non-firearm issues, this is the only thing I can think of in which we see something that a bad human being has done and we punish all of the law abiding as a result.
Wow,
we don't
so
ban
true.
driving because of DWIs. We don't ban sex because there are rapists, right? And yet we have this one constitutionally protected issue in which half the country is willing to strip the rights from everyone because of the acts of some bad actors.
Oh, 100%. And I'm just going to jump on something that you just said also. It's such an amazing point, the amount of things that'll just be thrown to the side. Like, it's okay, it's for safety when it's coming to the Second Amendment. For example, red flag laws, all the new rage and all the gun control cities and states out there. The initial point of red flag laws is to bypass due process. Imagine doing that with your speech. I mean, just plug any other right in there. And, well, no, that's unacceptable. But because it's a firearm and because it's a little scarier and maybe I don't know all about it and maybe it's just something that makes me uncomfortable, it's perfectly fine. That doesn't matter. It's not a right. Oh, yes, it is. And that's an incredibly important point. They suspend all of this natural defense of rights when it comes to firearms. I think, honestly, the nearest example that I can think of, and you guys jump in if you can think of a better one, prohibition is probably a good example of that, where they banned all alcohol because alcohol was causing all these problems. And what came of that? An illicit black market, and also, ironically, the NFA of 1934. But other than that, prohibition goes away. Interestingly enough, the NFA is still there.
Yeah. Or even with drug prohibition today, guess what? There is a ton of drugs in correctional facilities, prisons, and jails across the United States. They can't even keep it out of these secured buildings. What makes you think they're going to be able to do this across an entire country? It's not a realistic goal. And I think that's, this is an epiphany I came to the other day. I don't know that Emily agrees with me as much as that, but I think the gun control argument, I think the cat's out of the bag, and I think gun registry, cat's out of the bag. If everybody has a gun, a registry doesn't make any sense, and teaching responsible firearm ownership, teaching, bringing people into the fold for the gun community. I think that's the mission going forward because the cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, I want to go. That is not what I disagree with, by the way, not bringing people into the firearm community. Richard's just like, if everybody has a gun, the government doesn't want a registry anymore. The government still wants they want to know who's more dangerous than everybody else. They still want to know.
Well, but even in both those points, I mean, they're both valid points. I mean, it has been said that universal background checks are the clearest way to know where everything is. Well, that requires a registry. That's just as simple as it is. It cannot happen without a registry. Safe storage laws, completely ineffective without a registry. Where we're getting to now, all the goodies that the left is coming forward with on gun control are all backed by a centralized registry.
Yep. Yes. And on that note, folks, I really want to thank Richard and Emily for joining us again for today's episode. And we do want to link to their original video that discusses this topic in depth. We'll put that in the video description below. We also look forward to your comments. So please comment down below. What do you think about the discussion that we had here today? And what do you think of the MSU case? What are your thoughts regarding constitutional carry, charging this man with a felony, all that stuff that we touched upon in today's video? Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Pass the word around. Again, the whole purpose of our channel is to spread information so that you guys can go into the next discussion with coworkers, family, friends, and have a conversation with them around our Second Amendment rights so we can sway people to our side of the argument, which our side of the argument is just and constitutionally protected. With that being said, again, I want to thank Richard and Emily for joining us today, and we'll talk to you guys soon.